Budget 2022 is going to be a tough balancing act for Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, who has to look at the needs of a growing economy which has been hampered by the third wave of COVID-19, a widening fiscal deficit and quite a tough target. On the other hand, there are several constituents, especially service sectors, which have been hit once again. So what should be the priorities in this budget? To speak on this, I'm joined today by Dr. Arvind Panagariya. He is a professor of economics at Columbia University and the first vice chair of the Niti Aayog. Dr. Panagariya, great to have you back on the India Development Debate. Let me begin by getting your overview on why this is such a crucial budget in terms of the juncture and the context which I spoke about. It has come after a third wave which hasn't hit people too badly in terms of health, but has caused disruptions to an economic recovery once again.
Yes. So I'll point out to two things why this is such a critical budget. One is clearly what you have already pointed out, that we are still coming out of the pandemic, and it is, in this sense, continuation of the, sort of crisis. Probably it's a little strong term, but I think that there is a crisis. So that's the first reason. The second, of course, also is, to me, that this budget is going to come on the heels of the reversal by the government on the farm laws. And so there is some apprehension as to whether that fact is going to fundamentally alter the course of the government in terms of reforms. So, what signal the budget gives post withdrawal of the farm laws is very critical. So both of those reasons.
A lot of experts I've been speaking to say this is going to be a budget greatly influenced by the 5 state elections that come after. And part of it will be focus on what next after the farm laws have been repealed. Farm incomes are supposed to have doubled by 2022. What kind of a form and fashion do you think this politically inclined budget may take?
So this will, I hope it's not purely politically inclined, that there is some balancing done in the budget. After all, the budget is supposed to be for the entire country and not for the states where the elections are happening alone. But certainly, so we might see one announcement, at least maybe it's speculation, but may have been an announcement which has already come, is a very large hike in fertilizer subsidy. And that clearly is, I suspect, influenced by the fact that we have these elections happening, particularly in Uttar Pradesh and Punjab, which both have very large farm populations. So we might see some of this kind of, subsidization, populist, aimed at large sections of population. So, something for example, also SMEs, because, again, a very large part of the non-agricultural workforce is in SMEs. So those sorts of things we may say on the expenditure side. But I hope that, there is a balancing act done, both on the revenue side as well as the deficit, and most importantly on the reform side.
Are you concerned at all about us hitting our target for fiscal deficit at 6.8%, looking at the expectation that revenues, and especially tax revenues, will be buoyant?
I think the government should not have difficulty at all, I should say, in achieving the 6.8% target. 2 reasons. One, you have pointed out already, that revenues have been very buoyant and across the board, income tax, GST, corporate profit tax, everything has been higher than was in the BE, the budgetary estimates. So the revised estimates could come up, come could exceed the budgetary estimates by anything like close to even 20 to 25%. So that's one factor which should make the task of getting to the original target, 6.8%, relatively easy. Second fact also is that the GDP growth has been robust. So what we are, remember that we are measuring the fiscal deficit as a proportion of the GDP. So the GDP goes in the denominator, and that also is likely to be larger than what may have been in the BE, the budgetary estimate. So for both of those reasons, I think, I'll be quite surprised actually if the target is not met.
What do you think is the biggest challenge over here? People have been talking about a muting of consumer demand, in part because of COVID-19, third wave, but also the kind of impact we've seen from rural India. What can the government do to actually increase consumption? This is something that companies are also asking for and saying that they will be encouraged to go in for more capex if consumption does improve. What can be done in this regard?
Right. So, I must say my take on this issue is a little different, I hope a little more nuanced also than most others. Remember that at the end of the day, the GDP is the sum of consumption, government spending, investment demand, and the net exports minus imports. That's the sum. And in the end, the critical thing is that the GDP has risen by 9.2%. That's our kind of advanced estimate by MOSPI. And so this has been obviously supported by demand somewhere. The government spending has been robust. That has returned to a level which is fairly above, well above the pre-COVID level. Investment has returned also. It is also fairly above the pre-COVID level. So investment demand has happened. Net exports have done well. So that is also very good. So at the end of the day, as a residual, that leaves you private consumption, which has not returned to its pre-COVID level. And evidently, it's not inconsequential that private consumption has not returned to pre-COVID level because, for wherever the consumption demand is well below where it was, those particular industries evidently suffer. So for them, it's very consequential. But on aggregate, obviously, the aggregate demand has successfully supported the 9.2% growth. So that is the positive aspect that I see. Now, private consumption will come back. Perhaps it's lagging a little bit. Bits and parts have done well. On some of the sectors, and perhaps at the high end, the expenditures have been quite robust. It's more, as you pointed out, rural India, lower end of income distribution, and there may be a little more lag there, but I'm certainly not concerned about it. I think we will see as the next 6 months figures begin to come. We'll see the consumption demand there also returning. The big fear to me still remains, that is this pandemic turned into endemic, so that we can return to normal lives and no fear of lockdowns. I think that ultimately is the most important factor.
So, if I'm to understand this correctly, you don't think that the government needs to fret too much about boosting private consumption right now, whether it's an increase in allocation of Narega or some kind of easing of pressure on personal taxes? So,
I would lean more in favor of infrastructure building. So, if we want to increase spending, let's increase where it is also going to boost growth while providing jobs to the kinds of workers where the demand right now appears tepid. So even rural roads, for example, which will employ people in rural areas, that is where I would put the focus. Not certainly on, for example, tax cuts, because tax cuts then have a habit of not disappearing. And our tax to GDP ratio really is abysmal. That needs to rise, not fall. And I'm waiting to see, whether the 20% tax to GDP ratio that we observed in 2021 is going to hold out in 21-22. And I'm not sure, those numbers are still to come through in the budget. But what we actually need to broaden the tax base, which is very narrow currently, and I would rather not. Income tax rates at the low end are really low already, so I would recommend that.
If I were to ask you what you think should be the top priorities for the finance minister while delivering this budget, what would you say?
I would hope that, now we do at least symbolically return to fiscal consolidation. The debt to GDP ratio is actually quite high today. We will easily, IMF estimates that we will cross 90% now when the budget comes out. Now, remember that even if the government is paying 6% interest on that debt, that amounts to 5.4% of the GDP. That's a very large part of the government's expenditure side taken away by just the interest payments. And of course, what you pay in interest then cuts into the rest of the expenditures. So I think we need to ensure that we don't raise the debt yet further. There are two other reasons. One is that you're basically passing on the burden to the taxpayers for the future. So future generations are being stuck with this extra debt to repay. And third also is that when the government borrows too much, then it crowds out the private investment. At the end of the day, there's only so much financially intermediated savings available. And if the government takes away the large chunk of it, then evidently this will leave a lot less for the private investment. And now that the private investment is actually returning, it is showing robustness. This will be a bad time to crowd it out. So for those three reasons, I would say that it is time to signal that the government wants to return to fiscal consolidation. So I would recommend, at least symbolically 0.5% to 1% reduction in the fiscal deficit from the current 6.8% level. So that's one thing, but I would also have in mind some reform agenda if you would like to.
Yes, please go ahead. Please go ahead. I mean, I must say though, the expectations from any radical reforms this time around are relatively lower because of elections around the corner and crucial UP elections around the corner. But nevertheless, what do you think can be prioritized right now?
Okay, so first of all, now I think it is time for the government to announce something on trade. That has been much neglected, or I should say, actually, an area in which we have receded. From liberalizing, we have rolled back that liberalization, and protection has risen. Perhaps there is less appetite on the part of the government to lower the tariff rates, but certainly we ought to go aggressively on the free trade agreements. And I'm also very encouraged by some of the statements I've seen by Secretary Commerce, Mr. B.V.R. Subramaniam, who is a very measured kind of officer, that he does intend to pursue free trade agreements. And there have been other reports, at least, that signing of some sort of FTA with the UAE may be imminent, and there is negotiation underway with the UK, European Union, Australia, etc. So if that is the case, I would like to see, for example, that put in the budget speech up front. I think that will be a very good sign, very good indication that we are not, running away from globalization, but that, we do seek market access for our exports in these large markets, especially the European Union. But UAE is also a good market for us. And so those free trade agreements, I think an announcement along those lines will be very helpful. Personally, it will be good if there is some, liberalization as well. I have often argued that, tariffs that go up to 40% or rise all the way to over 100% really don't do any good to anybody. And indeed, those are prohibitive levels. No imports are coming in, so you're not even collecting any tariff revenue on those things, and you are punishing the consumer. The consumer ends up paying extra high prices related to what everybody else in the rest of the world pays. So that's on the trade side. Higher education, that's the second area where I think we need a good bit of action. Practically, nothing has happened in that area, in spite of reforms having begun actually in 1991. So that's practically untouched territory, except for medical education. There, as you know, even I was directly involved in that reform. And very similar kind of reform has to happen. The University Grants Commission Act of 1956, that's, almost 60-year-old act, which needs to be replaced by a more modern act. Number of things to be done there. I'll not elaborate on that. Third, I think, which I'll put, and that's the last one maybe I would like to mention, which is broadening of the tax base. Now, this all cannot happen in the budget itself, but some intention, I think, because it has to be negotiated. This is my problem. The latest figures I've been able to look for income taxation, direct personal income tax figures are from 2018-19. That year, only 1.5 crore taxpayers in India, out of a population of 138 crore, 1.5 crore paid income tax. Many more filed, probably close to 5 crore filed their taxes, but only 1.5 crore that year paid taxes actually. Widening this tax base has been a really serious challenge. It's very unlikely to happen because, for example, no government will actually go and tax the farmers or farm incomes, actually, even in urban areas. So, you easily leave there 45 to 50% of the population out of the tax base. But look, it's fine. You can tax the rich and wealthy more, but that's a very low base. You cannot, you've tried that. This has been tried and tax to GDP ratio has been stuck for many years at 17. Only 1 year it has gone to 20%, and we need to see whether that trend holds. So to me, it seems that, without collecting at least some tax from the masses, because mass of the income accrues to the masses. And unless you are willing to tax the masses somehow, you are not going to raise the tax to GDP ratio. And that is where I think GST instrument has to be utilized more effectively. What we have currently is about 50% of the goods in the consumer price index basket. In that basket, 50% of the goods are right now out of the GST net completely. And then you got number of products which are taxed at the low rate of 5%. I think we need to bring all those goods into the tax basket, into GST. And we need to then unify the tax rates to something like 12% and 18%. Redistribution can be done, should be done. Obviously, in India, there is no disagreement on redistribution. Everybody says that, yes, things should be done for the poor, but redistribution should be and can be done through expenditures. Let's raise the taxes at least in an efficient way, in a way that a decent amount of tax revenues come in so that we are not dependent on increasing the debt every year. And then do the redistribution through expenditures. That is a more efficient way to achieve equality and combat poverty. So those three things is what I would wish for.
Well, okay, so that was Dr. Panagariya's wish list. Raising taxes at a time when inflation is getting sticky, it would be very politically sensitive as well. Seems tough, but I see your reasoning there. Let me ask you a broader question, looking at global conditions. So we're going through a tough time of uncertainty. There are geopolitical issues on the horizon. You have the Federal Reserve going to raise interest rates, and that has spooked global markets. You have inflation, which continues to persist, higher crude prices. What do all of these mean for the Indian economy? Do you look at these as serious headwinds in the year to come, or do you think we're resilient enough?
So I expect the U.S. economy to continue to do well. I mean, the U.S. economy at least is not suffering in the way maybe some others are. China seems to be doing okay also. So there are two largest economies in the world which are doing reasonably okay. Inflation is high in the U.S. But, we should not read inflation in the U.S. as inflation in India. Our inflation rate has been within the assigned target of the RBI, 2 to 6%. And so I'm less concerned, we were not profligate in terms of giving very large packages during COVID. And so this problem, if anything, right, we have discussed just now that the private consumption demand has been tepid rather than overly excessive. So at least so far, in fact, we are still waiting for the consumption demand to recover. So I think, our even if you say that 5% inflation is there and it seems to you high, it's because of the supply constraints. So we ought to work on those. So that's where I will worry about. Globally speaking, I think still, to me, the bigger challenge remains from COVID. Now, some of this, the stock market effects of the interest rate or possibilities of interest rate hike in the US. These are there. There's no doubt. But I don't expect a major kind of threat to India in the sense of, in the way that it happened in 2013 summer. The way that rupee had to depreciate by a massive amount. My own take actually is that, this is a good opportunity for the RBI to let the rupee depreciate a little. That's something we need. Our goods can benefit from that because, it makes our products more competitive vis-a-vis foreign products. So both in our domestic market, our domestic products become more competitive vis-a-vis the foreign imports. As also this gives a shoulder to our exports. So I would, pitch that if outflows happen, some modest outflows will happen. There is absolutely no doubt they're already happening. So that will happen, but this is a time for the RBI to, in a measured way, let the rupee depreciate a little bit, take advantage of it. So what is a challenge can be turned into an opportunity that way. Other than that, as I said, the major fear to me still remains of the possible, whatever modest lockdowns that automatically happen, even if the government doesn't announce, if COVID just spreads, people are afraid to go out, and that causes de facto lockdowns, no matter how small, but they then impact the economic activity, and that probably remains the threat to watch more than anything else that I see for the global economy.
Do you think that this budget should extend special help for sectors that have now been hit by a third wave, your hospitality, tourism, airlines, etc.?
So I again lean against the government lending hands specifically to specific sectors and all. It should operate more on a general level. So remember that again, whatever needs to be done in terms of helping people overcome the crisis situation. So the kinds of things we were doing during COVID, providing food, providing shelter, that sort of thing. That hand has to be provided. Anybody who is in that kind of situation should be helped. Absolutely, no doubt, whether rural or urban or what have you. That should be done. Beyond that, sectorally, in terms of entrepreneurial activity, I lean more heavily on policies that cut across the sectors and let the entrepreneurs really then respond to those incentives. demand in things like hospitality, the entire sector, transportation, tourism, hotel, etc. They have remained tepid because simply, people can't engage in those activities. These are contact-intensive activities. So even if you lend a hand, through any special expenditures, it's not going to change the situation if contact doesn't happen because of the pandemic. So there, ultimately, the issue is helping those badly impacted, tide over the crisis. Not so much the industry itself, because the industry will ultimately be helped only by the pandemic turning into endemic.
Absolutely. Well, a lot to look forward to, an important budget there which is coming up. Thank you so much, Dr. Panagariya, for joining us and putting in perspective why it's crucial and what you would like to see from Budget 2022.
Thank you for having me, Tamanna.